The ivory silk of my dress cascaded behind me like spilled moonlight as I walked down the endless aisle, each step echoing through the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting rainbow fragments across the marble floor, fragments that seemed to dance and shimmer with each heartbeat that thundered in my chest. The organ's melody swelled around me, but all I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears as I gazed ahead at Adrian. He stood at the altar like something carved from a Renaissance dream, his dark hair catching the light, his emerald eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. The charcoal gray of his tuxedo contrasted perfectly with the white roses and baby's breath that adorned every pew, every pillar, every surface of this perfect moment I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. "You look breathtaking, Sophia," my father whispered beside me, his voice thick with emotion as he squeezed my arm. I could feel the tears threatening to spill over my carefully applied mascara, but I held them back. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The culmination of 3 years with the man who had swept me off my feet at that charity gala, who had proposed under the stars on the beach where we had our first kiss, who had promised me forever with such conviction that I never doubted he meant every word. The guests rose as we passed, faces beaming with joy, handkerchiefs already dabbing at eyes, cameras flashing like captured lightning. I caught a glimpse of my mother in the front row, her hands clasped to her heart, pride radiating from every line of her face. Behind her sat Adrian's mother, Diane, her lips curved in what should have been a smile but somehow felt cold against her sharp features. Something flickered in her dark eyes as our gazes met, something I couldn't quite name but that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine despite the warmth of the cathedral. "Don't be ridiculous," I chided myself. "It's just nerves. Wedding day jitters. Everything is perfect." But as I continued toward Adrian, I noticed Lucille standing among the bridesmaids, her platinum blonde hair gleaming under the cathedral lights. My best friend since college, the woman who had helped me choose this very dress, who had planned my bachelorette party, who had been there through every moment of doubt and every surge of joy throughout this engagement. She should have been glowing with happiness for me, but there was something in her expression, a tightness around her blue eyes, a strain in her smile that made my stomach flutter with unease. "Stop it," I commanded my racing thoughts. "This is your wedding day. Focus on Adrian. Focus on love. Focus on forever." My father placed my hand in Adrian's, and the familiar warmth of his touch steadied me. His fingers were strong, confident, but I could swear I felt the slightest tremor run through them as they closed around mine. When I looked up into his face, searching for reassurance, I found his eyes darting briefly toward the congregation before settling back on me. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice carrying across the hushed cathedral, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Adrian Michael Brown and Sophia Rose Mitchell in holy matrimony." The ceremony unfolded like a fairy tale. Adrian's vows were poetry, words about soulmates and destiny and love that would transcend time itself. My own voice trembled as I promised to love him in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. The weight of those words settled around us like a blessing, and when he slipped the platinum band onto my finger, I felt complete in a way I had never imagined possible. "You may kiss the bride." Adrian's lips found mine, soft and warm and perfect, and the cathedral erupted in applause and cheers. Rice and rose petals showered down on us as we practically floated back down the aisle, my hand secure in his, my heart soaring with the absolute certainty that I was the luckiest woman alive. The reception was a whirlwind of dancing and laughter, champagne toasts and tear-filled speeches. Adrian spun me around the dance floor to our song, "At Last" by Etta James, while our friends and family looked on with joy-brightened faces. Every detail was perfect, from the cascading white orchids that adorned each table to the 7-tier cake that looked like it belonged in a museum. But as the evening wore on, I began to notice small things that pricked at my euphoria like tiny thorns. Adrian's smile seemed forced during the father-daughter dance I shared with my dad, and he kept checking his watch when he thought no one was looking. When I caught Lucille's eye during the bouquet toss, which she made no effort to catch despite being single, she looked away quickly, her cheeks flushing pink in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne. Most unsettling of all was Diane, Adrian's mother, who spent most of the reception whispering urgently with relatives I didn't recognize, her dark eyes occasionally flicking toward Adrian and me with what looked almost like pity. The thought was so absurd that I dismissed it immediately, but it left a cold spot in my chest that even Adrian's kisses couldn't quite warm. "Ready to get out of here, Mrs. Brown?" Adrian murmured against my ear as the reception wound down, his breath sending delicious shivers along my neck. The sound of my new name on his lips should have thrilled me, but there was something in his tone, a hurried quality that made me pull back to study his face. "Is everything all right?" I asked, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting toward the exit. "Of course," he said, but his laugh sounded hollow. "Just eager to start our honeymoon, that's all." We said our goodbyes in a flurry of hugs and well wishes, rice and sparklers lighting our way to the waiting limousine. Adrian's ancestral home, now our home, waited for us in the hills outside the city, a sprawling Victorian mansion that had been in his family for generations. It was where we would spend our wedding night before flying to Paris the next morning, where we would begin the rest of our lives as husband and wife. The house loomed against the star-scattered sky as we pulled up the winding drive, its Gothic windows gleaming like watchful eyes in the moonlight. Ivy crawled up the stone walls and ancient oak trees cast twisted shadows across the manicured grounds. It was beautiful in a haunting old-world way, but tonight it felt more imposing than romantic. Adrian was quiet during the drive, his hand resting on my knee but his attention fixed on something beyond the window. When I tried to engage him in conversation about the ceremony, about how perfect everything had been, his responses were distracted, automatic. "The guest room in the East Wing has been prepared for your mother," he said suddenly, breaking a long stretch of silence. I blinked in confusion. "My mother went home with my father. Remember? They're not staying here tonight." Adrian's face went blank for a moment, then he shook his head with a forced laugh. "Right, of course. Sorry, I'm just tired. It's been a long day." But his explanation didn't ease the growing knot of uneasiness in my stomach. This wasn't like Adrian at all. He was usually so attentive, so focused on me, especially during important moments. Tonight, on what should have been the most important night of our lives together, he seemed like a stranger wearing my husband's face. The limousine pulled to a stop in front of the grand entrance, and the driver came around to open our door. Adrian helped me out, his hands steady but impersonal, more polite than passionate. The train of my dress whispered against the stone steps as we climbed toward the massive oak doors, their brass knockers gleaming in the porch light. Inside, the house was dimly lit, shadows pooling in corners and dancing along the walls lined with portraits of Adrian's ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to follow our progress as Adrian led me toward the main staircase, his footsteps echoing in the marble-floored foyer. "I had Rosa prepare the master suite," he said, his voice carrying a strange formality. "Everything should be ready for tonight." The way he said those last words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the house's drafty corridors. This wasn't how I had imagined our wedding night beginning. Where was the romance? The passion? The overwhelming joy of two people finally united as one? We climbed the stairs in silence, my dress trailing behind me like a ghostly echo of the day's celebration. The master suite was at the end of a long hallway lined with more ancestral portraits, and as Adrian pushed open the heavy door, I gasped at the beauty that greeted me. Rose petals covered the king-sized bed in intricate patterns, candles flickered on every surface, casting dancing light across silk curtains and antique furniture. A bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket beside two crystal flutes, and the scent of jasmine and vanilla filled the air from dozens of white roses arranged throughout the room. "It's beautiful," I breathed, some of my earlier tension melting away. This was more like the Adrian I knew, romantic, thoughtful, attentive to every detail. But when I turned to share this moment with him, to lose myself in his arms and finally claim the passion that had been building between us all day, I found him checking his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. "Adrian," I called softly. He looked up quickly, sliding the phone into his pocket. "Sorry, just work. You know how it is. On our wedding night?" The words came out sharper than I intended, and I saw him flinch slightly. "It's nothing urgent," he said, but he was already moving toward the door. "I just need to make a quick call. Some issue with the Paris hotel reservations. I'll be right back, I promise." Before I could protest, before I could ask why this couldn't wait until morning, he was gone, leaving me alone in the candlelit room with nothing but the echo of his footsteps disappearing down the hall. I stood there for a long moment, the silence pressing against me like a physical weight. The rose petals that had seemed so romantic moments before now felt like scattered fragments of a dream that was already starting to crumble. The candles flickered, casting shifting shadows that made the room feel alive with watching eyes. He'll be back, I told myself firmly. It's just nerves. Cold feet. Perfectly normal. But as minutes ticked by and turned into an hour, my rationalization began to feel as fragile as tissue paper in the rain. I tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried texting but received no response. The champagne sat untouched, its bubbles slowly dying in the crystal flutes. I changed out of my wedding dress and into the silk nightgown I had chosen specially for tonight. Ivory lace with tiny pearl buttons that caught the candlelight like captured stars. I brushed my hair until it fell in waves over my shoulders, applied the perfume Adrian loved and waited. And waited. The house settled around me with creaks and sighs that sounded almost like whispers in the darkness beyond the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 11, then 11:30. The candles burned lower, wax pooling on the antique surfaces, and still Adrian didn't return. By the time the grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight with deep, resonant chimes, I was pacing the room like a caged animal, my silk slippers silent on the Persian rug. Anger had replaced hurt, and fear was beginning to creep in around the edges of both emotions. Where could he be? What could possibly be so important that he would abandon his bride on their wedding night? And then, cutting through the silence that followed the clock's final chime, I heard it. A sound that made my blood freeze in my veins and my heart skip several beats before resuming at a frantic pace. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the house. A low, rhythmic creaking that seemed almost intimate. Like bed springs. The thought was so horrific, so impossible that I rejected it immediately. You're being paranoid. It's an old house. Old houses make noises. But as I pressed my ear to the door, the sound continued, accompanied now by what might have been muffled voices. Or gasps. My hand shook as I turned the ornate brass doorknob, easing the door open just enough to slip into the hallway. The corridor stretched before me like a tunnel, lit only by sconces that cast pools of yellow light between long stretches of shadow. The sounds were clearer now, coming from the direction of the east wing where the guest rooms were located. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, my bare feet soundless on the runner that lined the hardwood floor. Portraits of Adrian's ancestors watched my progress with painted eyes that seemed to gleam with secrets, and more than once I thought I saw movement in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing but shadows and stillness. The sounds grew louder as I approached the east wing, and with them came the unmistakable sound of voices, hushed but urgent, intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. It can't be. It's impossible. Adrian loves me. We just got married. Just hours ago he promised to love me forever. But even as my mind raced with denial, my body knew the truth. Every instinct screamed danger, betrayal, heartbreak so profound it would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, about trust, about the man I had just promised to spend my life with. I paused outside the door where the sounds were strongest. Diane's suite, the one she had occupied whenever she visited from her home in Europe. Light seeped from beneath the door, warm and golden, and the voices inside were clearer now, though still muffled by the heavy wood. A woman's laugh, soft and breathless. A man's voice, deep and familiar, whispering something that made the woman sigh. The sound of movement, urgent and passionate. My hand hovered over the doorknob for what felt like an eternity, every rational thought warring with the growing certainty that opening this door would destroy everything. My marriage, my trust, my heart, my very sense of reality. But I had to know. Even if the knowing killed me, I had to know. The brass was cold beneath my palm as I turned it slowly, praying it wouldn't creak, praying I was wrong, praying that whatever I found beyond this threshold wouldn't be the end of everything beautiful I had ever believed in. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a scene that will be burned into my memory until the day I die. Candles flickered throughout Diane's suite, casting dancing light across antique furniture and Persian carpets. But it was the bed that commanded my attention. The massive four-poster bed where two figures moved together in passionate embrace, their bodies intertwined, their voices raised in sounds of pleasure that felt like daggers in my chest. At first all I could see were shadows and curves, limbs pale in the candlelight. The woman's hair was spread across the pillows like spilled gold, and the man's broad shoulders blocked most of my view as he moved above her. But then he shifted, and the profile that was revealed in the flickering light made the world tilt on its axis. My husband. The man who had promised to love only me just hours before was making love to another woman in his mother's bed, his wedding ring catching the candlelight as his hands roamed her body with familiar intimacy. The woman beneath him arched upward, her face turning toward the door, and when I saw who it was, the last fragments of my world crumbled to dust. Lucille. My best friend. My maid of honor. The woman who had helped me choose my wedding dress, who had held my hand through every pre-wedding anxiety, who had told me just this morning how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful man. They moved together with the rhythm of lovers who had done this many times before, their whispered endearments and passionate sighs a symphony of betrayal that echoed in my shattered soul. I've missed this, Lucille breathed, her fingers trailing down Adrian's back. I hated watching you marry her today. It had to be done, Adrian replied, his voice thick with desire. But it's over now. She'll never suspect. We can finally be together the way we've always planned. The words hit me like physical blows, each one stealing another piece of my breath until I was dizzy with lack of oxygen. Always planned? How long had this been going on? How long had I been living a lie? What if she finds out? Lucille's voice carried a note of concern that might have been touching if it weren't about deceiving me. She won't, Adrian said with confident cruelty. Sophia's too trusting, too naive. She sees what she wants to see. Besides, after tonight we'll have access to her trust fund. We can disappear anywhere in the world. Trust fund. The inheritance from my grandmother that I had signed over to Adrian's control just last week as part of our pre-marriage financial planning. The inheritance I had trusted him to manage because I loved him, because I believed he would always have my best interests at heart. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that for a moment I couldn't process it. This wasn't a moment of weakness, a single mistake born of cold feet or confusion. This was a deliberate planned deception that had been orchestrated before I even knew Adrian existed. I must have made a sound, a gasp or a sob or some involuntary expression of devastation, because both figures on the bed froze. Adrian's head turned toward the door, and in the candlelight, I saw his face transform from passion to shock to something that might have been guilt if he were capable of such an emotion. Sophia. My name fell from his lips like a curse. Lucille scrambled to pull the sheets around herself, her face flushed with more than passion now. Embarrassment, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. I can explain, Adrian began, but his voice sounded hollow, automatic, like a recording of words he'd never expected to need. Explain. The word came out as barely a whisper, but it seemed to echo in the sudden silence that filled the room. Explain how? Explain what? I stepped into the room fully, my silk nightgown rustling in the thick air that smelled of sex and betrayal and the death of innocence. Both of them watched me with the wary attention of predators caught over a kill. Explain how my husband is in bed with my best friend on our wedding night? My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by an anger so pure it felt almost holy. Explain how this was all planned. How you're both stealing my money. How my entire marriage is a lie. It's not what it looks like, Lucille said, her voice small and pathetic. I laughed, and the sound was so bitter it made me flinch. Not what it looks like. You're naked in bed with my husband talking about our plans to steal from me, and it's not what it looks like. Adrian swung his legs over the side of the bed, reaching for his clothes. Sophia, please. Let me explain. It's complicated. Complicated. I was shouting now, all pretense of control abandoned. What's complicated about betrayal? What's complicated about lies? What's complicated about ruining someone's life for money? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. The words exploded from me with years of suppressed emotion behind them. You never loved me. This whole thing, our entire relationship, was about my inheritance. Was any of it real? Any of it at all? The silence that followed was answer enough. Adrian's face had gone pale, but there was no remorse there, no regret for the pain he had caused. Only calculation, the wheels turning as he tried to figure out how to minimize the damage to his carefully laid plans. Sophia, if you'll just calm down and listen. Calm down. I felt something snap inside me, some final thread that had been holding my sanity together. You want me to calm down? I trusted you with everything. My heart, my body, my future, my money. I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me. Lucille had been silent through this exchange, clutching the sheet to her chest, but now she spoke up with the kind of misplaced indignation that only the truly selfish can muster. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said. You weren't supposed to find out. Oh, well, that makes it so much better. I turned my fury on her, this woman who had smiled at my wedding just hours before, who had hugged me and told me how happy she was for me. How long? How long has this been going on? She looked at Adrian, seeking guidance or permission, or maybe just hoping he would answer for her. But Adrian was busy pulling on his shirt, his movements quick and efficient, like he was preparing for battle or escape. How long? I demanded again. 2 years, Lucille whispered. 2 years. Before Adrian had even proposed. Before he had told me he loved me. Before I had started planning the future I thought we would share. Since before we were engaged? My voice was very quiet now, very deadly. Adrian's hands stilled on his buttons. Sophia. Since before you told me you loved me? Since before you proposed? Since before I introduced you to Lucille at that dinner party? The last piece fell into place with sickening clarity. I hadn't introduced them at all. They had already known each other. The surprise on Lucille's face when I brought Adrian home had been fake. Their chemistry, which I had chalked up to both of them being important to me, had been real, but for all the wrong reasons. You planned this from the beginning. It wasn't a question. You researched me, found out about my inheritance, and then what? Made sure you met me at that charity gala? Made sure I would fall in love with you. Adrian's silence was confession enough. And you, I turned back to Lucille, helped him. You were my friend first. You introduced him to all my vulnerabilities, told him exactly how to make me fall in love with him. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they looked more like frustration than genuine remorse. You have to understand, Sophia. Adrian and I have history. We were together first. That's not an excuse. I screamed. That's not a reason to destroy someone's life. If you wanted to be together, you should have stayed together. You shouldn't have involved me. We needed the money, Adrian said flatly, finally abandoning any pretense of love or regret. Lucille's family cut her off, and my business is failing. Your grandmother's trust fund was the solution to both our problems. The casual cruelty of it, the way he spoke about my life and my love as nothing more than a financial transaction, was almost more devastating than the betrayal itself. Get out. My voice was very quiet, very calm. Sophia. Get out of this house. Both of you. Now. This is my house, Adrian said, and there was something dangerous in his tone now, something that made me take a step back. Actually, a voice said from the doorway, it's mine. We all turned to see Diane standing in the entrance to her suite, her dark hair perfectly coiffed despite the late hour, her expression colder than winter frost. She was fully dressed in an elegant black ensemble that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which I supposed she was. Mother, Adrian began, but Diane held up one perfectly manicured hand. I've heard enough, she said, her accent making each word sound like a blade cutting through silk. More than enough. You knew, I whispered, looking at this woman who had welcomed me into her family just hours before, who had smiled and made toasts and acted like she was gaining a beloved daughter-in-law. Diane's dark eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected, regret. I suspected, she said quietly. But I hoped I was wrong. I hoped my son had more honor than this. Mother, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Diane's voice could have frozen fire. You married this beautiful, trusting girl for her money while carrying on an affair with her friend. You planned to steal from her and abandon her. You have disgraced our family name and broken every vow you made before God. Adrian's face went through several expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, before settling on defensive indignation. She would never have missed the money. She's got more than she knows what to do with. That's not the point. Diane's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the fury beneath. The point is that you are a thief and a liar and a disgrace to everything this family has stood for. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. I'm sorry, child. Sorrier than you can know. This house belongs to me and I want you to know that you are welcome here. She looked at Adrian and Lucille with undisguised contempt. Are not. What do you mean it belongs to you? Adrian demanded. Diane smiled, and it was like watching a wolf bare its teeth. Did you really think I would leave our ancestral home to a son who would sell it for gambling money? The house, the land, all of it remains in my name. You have no claim here. The implications of this hit Adrian like a physical blow. Not only had his plan to steal my money failed, but he was also losing the home he had counted on inheriting. You can't do this, he said. I already have. Diane pulled a folded document from her purse. I've changed my will. You get nothing. Not the house, not the investments, not the family business. Nothing. But I'm your son. You are my son. Now you're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. The finality in her voice, the complete severing of familial bonds, seemed to shock Adrian more than anything that had happened so far. He stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. Lucille, Diane continued, turning her attention to my former best friend, I suggest you collect your things and leave. No. Before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Lucille scrambled off the bed, clutching the sheet around herself, her face streaked with tears and mascara. My clothes are in the guest room where you left them when you came here to seduce my son, Diane said with icy precision. You have 5 minutes. As Lucille hurried from the room, Diane turned back to Adrian. You have until sunrise to remove yourself and your belongings from this property. After that, you will be considered a trespasser. Where am I supposed to go? The plaintive note in his voice might have touched me once. Now it just sounded pathetic. That's not my concern, Diane replied. You should have thought of that before you decided to destroy your life for money. Adrian looked at me then, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine remorse in his eyes. Sophia, don't. I held up a hand, surprised by how steady my voice was. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it meant nothing. Don't say you love me. We both know that would be just another lie. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. What could he say after all? What words could possibly bridge the chasm of betrayal that stretched between us? I trusted you, I said quietly. I gave you everything I had, my heart, my body, my future, my money. I would have done anything for you. And you threw it all away for what? A trust fund you could have shared if you'd just been honest? A woman who helped you deceive me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, echoing Lucille's earlier words. No, I agreed. It was supposed to happen in secret, with me never finding out. With me living my whole life as your fool while you and Lucille laughed behind my back. The truth of that, the casual cruelty of their original plan, seemed to hit him for the first time. His face crumpled slightly, as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered. But you did. You have. And the worst part is that you would have kept hurting me forever if I hadn't found out. Diane had been watching this exchange with the attention of a hawk watching prey, and now she stepped forward. Sophia, dear, would you like me to call someone? Your parents? A friend. The thought of explaining this to my parents, of seeing the pity and horror in their eyes, made my stomach clench. And friends? Lucille had been my closest friend. The others were acquaintances at best, people who would be more interested in the scandal than in comforting me. No, I said quietly. Thank you, but no. I need to think. Diane nodded understandingly. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. This house has seen its share of heartbreak over the years. Perhaps it can offer you some peace. I looked around the room that had been the site of my world's destruction, at the rumpled bed, the flickering candles, the scattered clothes, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest where my heart used to be. I should go, Adrian said, but he made no move toward the door. Yes, I agreed. You should. But still he lingered, as if hoping for forgiveness or understanding or some sign that this could be fixed. Sophia, what we had was a lie. The words came out flat, final. All of it. Every kiss, every I love you, every promise. It was all just part of your plan. Not all of it, he protested. Some of it was real. My feelings for you were convenient, I finished. Useful. But not real. If they were real, you wouldn't have been able to do this. He flinched as if I had struck him, but I felt no satisfaction in causing him pain. I felt nothing at all except a vast, echoing emptiness where my future used to be. Go, Adrian. Take Lucille and go. Live your life with the woman you actually want and let me figure out how to rebuild mine. This time he did move toward the door, but he paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I did care about you. No, I replied, my voice steady and sure. You didn't. If you had, this never would have happened. The sound of his footsteps disappearing down the hallway was like a door closing on everything I had thought my life would be. Within minutes, I heard movement throughout the house. Drawers opening and closing, muffled voices, the sounds of hasty packing. Diane remained with me through it all, her presence steady and comforting without being intrusive. When the front door finally slammed shut and a car engine started in the driveway, she moved to the window and watched until the taillights disappeared into the night. They're gone, she said quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. What will you do now? It was a good question. What did someone do when their entire life imploded in the space of a single evening? When everything they had believed about love and trust and the future turned out to be carefully orchestrated lies? I don't know, I admitted. Diane moved to stand beside me, her hand gentle on my shoulder. You'll survive, she said with quiet certainty. You're stronger than you know. I don't feel strong. I feel like a fool. The two aren't mutually exclusive, Diane replied. Sometimes being a fool is what allows us to love completely. The problem isn't with your capacity for trust, it's with their capacity for betrayal. We stood in silence for a while, surrounded by the evidence of my shattered dreams. Finally, Diane spoke again. There's something else you should know, she said carefully. I looked at her, not sure I could handle any more revelations. The wedding guests, our family, your family, our friends, they're all staying at the hotel in town tonight. Tomorrow morning they'll expect to see you off on your honeymoon. They'll want to congratulate you, to wish you well. The thought of facing all those people, of explaining what had happened or trying to pretend everything was fine, made my chest tight with panic. I can't, I whispered. I can't face them. I can't tell them. Then don't, Diane said simply. I stared at her. What do you mean? A slow smile spread across her face, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. I mean that Adrian and Lucille made their choices. They chose deception and betrayal and greed. Perhaps it's time they face the consequences of those choices. I don't understand. Diane turned to face me fully, her dark eyes glinting with something that might have been mischief or might have been vengeance. My dear girl, you've been playing defense all evening. It's time to play offense. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the hotel's grand ballroom as our wedding guests gathered for what they thought would be a farewell breakfast before Adrian and I departed for our honeymoon in Paris. I stood at the back of the room, watching familiar faces chatting over coffee and pastries, completely unaware that their perfect wedding celebration was about to become something else entirely. I had barely slept, spending the remaining hours of my wedding night planning what Diane had called my moment of truth. She had been surprisingly helpful, providing details about Adrian's financial situation that I hadn't known, contacts who could help me secure my assets, and most importantly, the courage to take control of my narrative rather than letting them write it for me. My parents sat at a table near the front, their faces glowing with pride and happiness that made my chest ache. Adrian's relatives filled several tables, their expressions expectant as they waited for the happy couple to make their appearance. Lucille's family was there too, her parents beaming with the reflected joy of their daughter's best friend's perfect wedding. They had no idea what was coming. Adrian arrived first, looking polished and composed in his traveling clothes, his smile practiced and convincing. He worked the room like the consummate performer he was, accepting congratulations and well wishes with the kind of charm that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. Watching him now, knowing what I knew, I could see the performance for what it was: calculated, hollow, designed to extract maximum benefit from every interaction. Lucille appeared moments later, radiant in a powder blue dress that complemented her blonde hair perfectly. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed she had gotten away with the perfect crime, hugging my relatives, laughing with old college friends, playing the role of the devoted best friend to perfection. Neither of them had seen me yet, positioned as I was behind a decorative pillar near the entrance. I wanted to observe them first to see how they would handle this charade before I brought their house of cards crashing down. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian called out, tapping his champagne flute with a silver spoon. The room gradually quieted, all attention focusing on my husband as he prepared to address our guests. Thank you all for being here this morning. Sophia and I are so grateful for your presence at our wedding yesterday, and we wanted to share a few words before we head off to Paris. The crowd murmured appreciation, faces turned expectantly toward Adrian. He was in his element, commanding the room with practiced ease. Yesterday was the most beautiful day of my life, he continued, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine emotion. To marry the woman of my dreams surrounded by everyone we love, there's no greater joy than that. Several people sighed appreciatively. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, still emotional from the previous day's events. Sophia and I feel incredibly blessed, Adrian went on, and we want you all to know how much your support means to us as we begin this new chapter of our lives together. It was a beautiful speech, delivered with perfect sincerity. If I hadn't known better, I might have been moved by it myself. Instead, I felt sick watching him manipulate these good people who genuinely cared about us. Where is the blushing bride? Called out my Uncle Robert, looking around the room with a good-natured smile. Adrian's expression faltered for just a moment, so briefly that most people probably didn't notice. But I saw it, that flicker of uncertainty as he realized he didn't actually know where I was or what I might be planning. She's just freshening up, he said smoothly. You know how women are, always wanting to look perfect. The comment got a few chuckles, but I noticed Lucille's face tighten slightly. She was scanning the room now, and when her eyes found me behind the pillar, her face went pale. She said something to Adrian, too quietly for me to hear, and I saw his body language change instantly. His shoulders tensed, his smile became strained, and his eyes began searching the crowd with barely concealed panic. It was time. I stepped out from behind the pillar, moving through the crowd with measured steps. Conversations quieted as people noticed my approach, their faces lighting up with affection and curiosity about what I might say. I was wearing a simple black dress, chosen deliberately for its funeral connotations, and my wedding ring was notably absent from my finger. I had left it on Diane's nightstand along with a note thanking her for her kindness and promising to stay in touch. Sophia, my mother called out, rising from her chair with arms outstretched. There's our beautiful bride. I kissed her cheek, accepting her embrace while keeping my eyes fixed on Adrian. His face had gone ashen, and I could see the wheels turning as he tried to figure out what I might be planning to say. Good morning, everyone, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. Thank you all for coming this morning and thank you for celebrating with us yesterday. It truly was illuminating. Adrian's eyes widened slightly at my word choice, but he maintained his composure. I have something I'd like to share with all of you, I continued, moving to stand beside Adrian at the front of the room. Something important about my marriage. Sophia, Adrian murmured under his breath, what are you doing? I ignored him, focusing instead on the sea of expectant faces before me. Yesterday I thought I was marrying the man of my dreams. I began, my voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside me. I thought I was beginning the greatest adventure of my life with someone who loved me as much as I loved him. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several people smiled, clearly expecting a heartfelt declaration of love. But last night I discovered something that changed everything. The energy in the room shifted, smiles faltering as people sensed the undercurrent of something darker in my tone. Sophia, please, Adrian said, his voice urgent but quiet enough that only those closest could hear. Don't do this. We can work this out. I turned to look at him fully, and in that moment, I let every ounce of pain and betrayal show on my face. Can we, Adrian? Can we work out the fact that you spent our wedding night in bed with my best friend? The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Then the whispers started, sharp intakes of breath, gasps of disbelief, the sound of chairs scraping as people turned to get a better view of the unfolding drama. Adrian's face cycled through several expressions, denial, anger, calculation, before settling on desperate damage control. That's not, you don't understand what you saw. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice cutting through his protests like a blade. I understand that this entire relationship was a lie designed to give you access to my inheritance. I understand that you and Lucille have been planning this betrayal for 2 years. I understand that my wedding was nothing more than a business transaction to you. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. My father was on his feet, his face dark with fury, while my mother sat frozen in her chair, one hand pressed to her chest as if she were having trouble breathing. "Is this true?" demanded Adrian's uncle Waylon, a stern man who had given one of the toasts the night before. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. "Lucille," I called out, turning to face my former best friend. She was pressed against the wall near the buffet table, her face the color of milk, her hands shaking as she gripped her purse like a lifeline. "Would you like to tell everyone how long you and Adrian have been sleeping together? Or shall I?" "Sophia, please," Lucille whispered, but her voice carried in the terrible silence. 2 years, I announced to the room. "They've been having an affair for 2 years, planning this elaborate con to steal my grandmother's trust fund. The fund I stupidly signed over to Adrian's control just last week." The reaction was immediate and explosive. My father started toward Adrian with murder in his eyes, only to be restrained by my uncles. Lucille's mother began crying, her hands covering her face in shame. Adrian's relatives were shouting questions and accusations, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and rage. Through it all, Adrian stood frozen, his carefully constructed facade finally crumbling under the weight of public exposure. "You want to know the most pathetic part?" I continued, my voice somehow remaining steady despite the chaos around me. "I would have given you anything you asked for. If you had just been honest, if you had told me you needed money, I would have helped you. But instead you chose to destroy me for it." "Sophia," Adrian tried one more time, reaching for my arm. I stepped back, avoiding his touch like it was poison. Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. Don't ever come near me again." I turned to address the room one final time. "I want you all to know that I'm fine. I'm hurt obviously, but I'm fine. And I want you to know that this betrayal says nothing about love or marriage or trust in general. It only says something about the character of the people who chose deception over honesty." I looked directly at Lucille, who was now sobbing openly. "I trusted you with my heart and you sold it for money. I hope it was worth it." Finally, I turned back to Adrian, this man who had been my whole world just 24 hours before. "You can have each other," I said quietly. "You deserve each other." And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the wreckage of my old life and stepping into whatever came next. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, asset recovery, and emotional reconstruction. Adrian had indeed transferred significant portions of my trust fund to accounts he controlled, but Diane's lawyers were ruthless in their pursuit of recovery. Within weeks, every penny had been returned, along with substantial penalties that left Adrian's already struggling business in ruins. Lucille's family, horrified by their daughter's behavior, cut her off completely. Adrian's relatives followed suit, ostracizing him from the family business and social circle that had provided his primary source of income and status. I moved back to my apartment in the city, throwing myself into work and therapy with equal determination. The betrayal had shattered my ability to trust, but it had also revealed a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had survived the worst thing I could imagine and I was still standing. But karma, as it turned out, was just getting started. 6 months after that devastating morning in the hotel ballroom, I received a call from an unknown number. "Sophia? It's Waylon, Adrian's uncle." I hadn't spoken to any of Adrian's family since the wedding debacle, so the call was unexpected. "Hello, Waylon. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you. I'm calling because, well, I thought you should know what's been happening with Adrian and Lucille." Despite myself, I felt a flutter of curiosity. I had deliberately avoided any news about them, wanting to focus on my own healing rather than dwelling on their fate. "I'm not sure I want to know," I said honestly. "I think you do," Waylon replied. "They're destroying each other, Sophia. It's quite spectacular, actually." Against my better judgment, I found myself listening as Waylon filled me in on the chaos that had become Adrian and Lucille's relationship. Apparently, without my trust fund to cushion their fall, the stress of their dramatically reduced circumstances had begun eating away at their partnership like acid. Adrian blamed Lucille for encouraging him to go through with the marriage scheme, while Lucille blamed Adrian for getting caught. They had moved in together out of necessity rather than love, and the cramped apartment they could afford was a far cry from the luxury they had planned to enjoy. "Adrian's been drinking heavily," Waylon continued. Lost what was left of his business and now he can barely hold down a regular job. Lucille's working at a department store and from what I hear, she hates every minute of it. That's sad, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. Not because I felt sorry for them, but because the destruction of their lives felt more hollow than satisfying. There's more, Waylon said. They've been fighting constantly. Neighbors have called the police twice for domestic disturbances. Lucille tried to leave him last month, but she has nowhere to go. Her family won't take her back and she burned all her other bridges when this came out. The picture Waylon painted was one of two people trapped in a prison of their own making, their betrayal having poisoned not only their victims but themselves as well. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Waylon was quiet for a moment. Because I want you to know that justice has been served, even if it didn't come from any court. They chose to build their happiness on the destruction of yours, and it turns out that's not a very stable foundation. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time processing what I had learned. Part of me felt vindicated, they were getting exactly what they deserved. But a larger part felt empty, as if their suffering somehow diminished rather than validated my own healing. I realized then that true recovery meant letting go of the need for their punishment to define my peace. Their consequences were theirs to bear, just as my healing was mine to claim. A year later I met David. He was nothing like Adrian. Where Adrian had been smooth and charming, David was genuine and steady. Where Adrian had been focused on what I could give him, David was interested in who I was as a person. He knew my story from the beginning, knew about the betrayal and the trust issues it had created, and he was patient with my healing in a way that gradually rebuilt my faith in the possibility of honest love. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully, with a transparency that would have been impossible before my experience with Adrian. David's patience and consistency gradually convinced me that not all men were predators, not all charm was manipulation, and not all love was conditional. 2 years after my disastrous first wedding, David proposed on the beach where Adrian had once made promises he never intended to keep. But where Adrian's proposal had been a performance designed to manipulate my emotions, David's was simple, honest, and focused entirely on our genuine connection. I said yes. Our wedding was small, intimate, attended only by people who truly loved and supported us. Diane was there, having become an unexpected friend and mentor in the aftermath of Adrian's betrayal. My parents, who had struggled to trust their judgment after being so completely fooled by Adrian, slowly learned to love David for his genuine character. It was during the reception for this second wedding, as I danced with my new husband surrounded by people who actually cared about my happiness, that I saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the garden. He looked terrible, thin, unshaven, his clothes rumpled and stained. He stood behind the garden fence like a ghost from my past, his eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Excuse me," I murmured to David, kissing his cheek. "I'll be right back." David followed my gaze and saw Adrian immediately. His jaw tightened, but he simply nodded. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "I need to handle this myself." I walked across the garden toward Adrian, aware that several guests had noticed his presence and were watching nervously. When I reached the fence, I stopped just out of arm's reach and waited for him to speak. He looked even worse up close. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin had a grayish pallor, and he smelled like he hadn't bathed in days. "Sophia," he said, and his voice was hoarse, broken. "Adrian." I kept my tone neutral, professional. You look beautiful. Happy. Thank you." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of my wedding reception continuing behind me. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses raised in genuine celebration. "I came to apologize," he said finally. "Did you? I know it doesn't matter now. I know it's too late. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it." I studied his face, looking for the manipulation, the calculation that had always been there before. But all I saw now was broken desperation. "What happened to Lucille?" I asked. Adrian's face crumpled. "She left me 6 months ago. Said she couldn't stand looking at me anymore, couldn't stand what we'd become. And now you're alone." "Completely." He laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "No money, no job, no family, no friends. Everyone I ever cared about won't speak to me." "Consequences," I said simply. "I know. I know this is what I deserve. But Sophia, I need you to know, what I felt for you is real. Maybe it started as part of the plan, but somewhere along the way it became real. I looked at this broken man who had once been my whole world and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no vindication. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness where all that pain used to live. It doesn't matter, I said quietly. What? Whether it was real or not. It doesn't matter anymore. Adrian's face went through several expressions: confusion, hope, despair. I forgive you, I continued, and I realized as I said the words that they were true. Not for your sake but for mine. I forgive you because carrying anger was poisoning my ability to be happy. Does that mean? It means nothing except that I'm at peace with what happened. It means I hope you find a way to build a better life for yourself. But it doesn't mean I want you in mine. Adrian stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the finality of my words. You're really happy, he said, and there was wonder in his voice, as if he was surprised that such a thing was possible after what he had done to me. Yes. I am. With him. With myself, I corrected. David is wonderful, but my happiness doesn't depend on him the way it once depended on you. I learned to be whole on my own. This seemed to hit Adrian harder than anything else I had said. His face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might cry. I destroyed everything, he whispered. You destroyed what we had, I agreed. But you didn't destroy me. You couldn't. I took a step back from the fence, preparing to return to my real life, my real wedding, my real happiness. Goodbye, Adrian. Sophia, wait. I turned back, and in that moment I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the charming man who had swept me off my feet, not as the villain who had betrayed me, but as a deeply flawed human being who had made terrible choices and was living with the consequences. I can't give you what you're looking for, I said gently. I can't absolve you or take away your guilt or make your life better. You have to do that yourself. I don't know how. The same way I did. One day at a time. With help. With honesty. With the decision to be better than you were. I started to walk away again, then paused. Adrian. Yes. Don't come to my wedding again. Don't come to my home. Don't contact me or David or anyone in my family. If you want to apologize, do it by living a life worth something. Do it by making sure you never hurt anyone the way you hurt me. And if I do that, if I become better. I looked at him one last time, this man who had taught me that I was stronger than I knew, more resilient than I had imagined, more capable of love than I had dared to hope. Then maybe someday you'll forgive yourself, I said. But that's between you and you. It has nothing to do with me. I walked back to my wedding reception, back to David, back to the life I had built from the ashes of my dreams. I didn't look back to see if Adrian was still standing at the fence because it didn't matter. His story was his to write now, just as mine was mine. David met me halfway across the garden, his eyes searching my face for signs of distress. Are you okay? I'm perfect, I said, and meant it completely. He pulled me into his arms and we danced under the stars while our friends and family celebrated around us. The past was past, the future stretched bright and unlimited before us, and in that moment I was exactly where I belonged. Adrian never contacted me again. Years later, Diane mentioned in passing that she had heard he was working as a counselor at a substance abuse clinic, helping other people rebuild their lives after hitting rock bottom. Whether that was true or not, whether he had found redemption or was still lost in the consequences of his choices, I never knew. And I realized with deep satisfaction that I didn't need to know. Some stories end with revenge. Others end with justice. But the best ones, I learned, end with peace. Mine ended with love. Real love, honest love, the kind of love that builds rather than destroys, that heals rather than harms, that sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. It ended with me, standing in my own strength, surrounded by people who valued my happiness more than my bank account, married to a man who saw my scars as proof of my resilience rather than evidence of my foolishness. It ended with the knowledge that betrayal had not broken me. It had revealed exactly how unbreakable I actually was. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all.